And her unborn child more than 4 decades ago is headed to trial.
A magistrate in Carbon County says there's enough evidence to send Luis Sierra to trial for the 1976 murder of then 15-year-old Evelyn Colon. Newswatch 16's Carmela Maddaloni shows us the emotional day in court.
So on December 20th, 1976, a teenager was playing near the Lehigh River, Eastside Borough, Carbon County. He discovered a dismembered body and a nearly full-term fetus. The state police were called, evidence was collected, and ultimately an autopsy was completed, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide by likely strangulation, and there was also a gunshot wound noted to the neck of the dismembered female.
Welcome back to Revealer TV, where we uncover real crimes, hidden truths, and the mysteries that time could not erase. Some cases are solved within days. Others take months or even years. But every so often, a case emerges that defies explanation for decades, leaving behind more questions than answers. Tonight's story is one of those cases. It begins with a teenage girl who vanished without a trace. No public search, no national headlines, no urgent missing person investigation. Instead, her family was led to believe she had simply moved away and started a new life. For more than 4 decades, they waited for a phone call that never came. They waited for a letter. They waited for a visit. They waited for any sign that she was alive. What they didn't know was that the truth had been hidden hundreds of miles away, buried beneath a false identity and one of Pennsylvania's most haunting unsolved murder cases. For 44 years, investigators knew her only by a nickname, Bob Doe. They didn't know who she was, they didn't know where she came from, and they didn't know who had taken her life. But advances in DNA technology would eventually uncover a story far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. This is the true story of Evelyn Colon. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to go back to the winter of 1976. On a cold December morning in Carbon County, Pennsylvania, a teenage boy was walking near the Lehigh River. The temperatures were below freezing, and much of the landscape was covered in the bleak stillness of winter. As he made his way along the riverbank, something unusual caught his attention. Several suitcases were scattered below the Interstate 80 bridge. At first, there didn't seem to be anything remarkable about them. But as he moved closer, he noticed that 2 of the suitcases had burst open. What he saw inside stopped him in his tracks. At first glance, he thought he was looking at a doll. Then he realized it wasn't a doll at all. Terrified, he fled the scene and alerted authorities. When Pennsylvania State Police arrived, they were confronted with a crime scene unlike anything they had encountered before. Inside the suitcases were the dismembered remains of a young woman. Alongside her was the body of a near-term unborn child. The discovery shocked investigators. The victim had suffered a brutal death. Medical examinations later determined that she had been strangled, severely beaten, and shot. Evidence suggested that the dismemberment occurred after death. Whoever committed the crime had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal the victim's identity. There were no identification documents, no personal belongings, no clues that could immediately tell investigators who she was. The woman appeared to be young, possibly in her teens or early 20s. She had dark hair, olive-toned skin, and was heavily pregnant at the time of her death. Detectives quickly realized that identifying her would be the key to solving the case, but that proved far easier said than done. Despite extensive efforts, no missing person report matched the victim. No family came forward searching for a pregnant daughter who had vanished. No friends reported her disappearance. No employer recognized the descriptions released by investigators. It was as though she had simply vanished from existence. As weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, the mystery deepened. Without a name, detectives had nowhere to begin. The unidentified victim was eventually given a temporary name, Beth Doe, a placeholder for a young woman whose real identity had been stolen from her. Meanwhile, more than 100 miles away in Jersey City, New Jersey, another story was unfolding. That story belonged to a 15-year-old girl named Evelyn Colon. Evelyn was born into a close-knit Puerto Rican family. She grew up surrounded by parents, siblings, and relatives who cared deeply for her. Like many immigrant families, the Collins worked hard and leaned on one another through life's challenges. By all accounts, Evelyn was loved. In 1976, Evelyn became involved with a 19-year-old man named Luis Sierra. The relationship quickly became serious. Not long afterward, Evelyn became pregnant. Although the family was concerned about her young age, they accepted the reality of the situation and continued supporting her. Eventually, Evelyn and Sierra moved into an apartment together. At first, everything appeared normal from the outside.
But according to family members, troubling signs soon began to emerge. Years later, relatives would tell investigators that Sierra displayed controlling behavior. Some family members claimed Evelyn appeared frightened of him. There were allegations that he monitored her movements and restricted her freedom. Still, no one could have imagined how the story would end. As Evelyn's pregnancy progressed, her family remained involved in her life. Her mother regularly checked on her, bringing meals and offering support as the due date approached. The last time they saw Evelyn, she was heavily pregnant and only weeks away from giving birth. Nothing about that visit suggested it would be their final goodbye. Then, sometime in December 1976, everything changed. Evelyn called her mother and said she wasn't feeling well. Concerned, her mother prepared soup and headed to the apartment. When she arrived, something felt wrong. No one answered the door. After repeated attempts, she discovered the apartment was empty. The furniture was gone. Evelyn was gone. And Luis Sierra was gone too. Neighbors reported that the couple had moved away. The family was confused, but they still believed there must be an explanation. Then a letter arrived. The letter was written in Spanish and postmarked from Connecticut. It claimed that Evelyn had safely given birth to a healthy baby boy. According to the letter, she and Sierra had relocated and were doing well. The message reassured the family that everything was fine and asked them not to worry. Today, such a letter would raise immediate suspicion, but in 1977, life was different. There were no cell phones, no social media accounts, no easy way to verify someone's whereabouts. Families often depended on letters for communication, and so the Colon family believed what they were told. They assumed Evelyn had started a new chapter of her life. They waited to hear from her again. Days became months, months became years. Yet no additional letters arrived, no phone calls came, no visits happened. The silence grew harder to explain. Eventually, family members began seeking answers, but the existence of that letter created a major obstacle. Authorities believed Evelyn had left voluntarily. Without evidence suggesting foul play, there was little they could do. As a result, no meaningful missing person investigation was launched. The person responsible had successfully created the illusion that Evelyn had simply chosen to disappear. And for decades, that deception worked. While the Colon family waited for answers, Evelyn's remains sat in an evidence file in Pennsylvania under a name that wasn't hers, Beth Doe, an unidentified victim whose real story remained hidden from the world. As the years passed, the mystery surrounding Beth Doe only grew deeper. Investigators refused to completely abandon the case, but they faced a frustrating reality. Without knowing the victim's identity, every lead seemed to end in a dead end. The suitcases offered little help. The blanket found with the remains revealed nothing significant. Witnesses were non-existent, and because no one had reported the young woman missing, there was no obvious family to contact and no starting point for detectives to follow. The case slowly transformed into one of Pennsylvania's most perplexing cold cases. Years turned into decades. The unidentified victim remained known only as Beth Doe. In 1983, with no answers in sight, local officials made the difficult decision to bury her remains. She was laid to rest beneath a headstone bearing a name that wasn't hers. No parents stood beside the grave, no siblings gathered to say goodbye, no family members knew where she was. The young woman who had once laughed, dreamed, and looked forward to becoming a mother was buried as a stranger. Back in New Jersey, Evelyn's family continued living with uncertainty. They never stopped wondering what had happened. Her father searched for information whenever he could. Relatives asked questions, friends were contacted, addresses were checked, but every effort led nowhere. The years continued to pass. Eventually, Evelyn's mother became seriously ill. Even as her health declined, she never stopped thinking about her daughter. Before her death, she reportedly made one final request to her family: find Evelyn. Those words would remain with them for years. She died never knowing what had happened to her daughter, never knowing that Evelyn had already been gone for decades. Meanwhile, investigators continued preserving evidence from the Beth Doe case. Every time forensic science advanced, they revisited the file in hopes that new technology could succeed where older methods had failed. In the early 2000s, a breakthrough seemed possible. Scientists used isotope analysis on the victim's remains. The technique examines chemical markers absorbed through food and water during childhood and can sometimes provide clues about where a person grew up.
The results surprised everyone. The data appeared to suggest that Beth Doe may have spent her early years somewhere in Central Europe. Suddenly, investigators shifted their focus. Could the victim have been an immigrant? Was she originally from Poland, Slovakia, or another European country? Authorities spent years exploring those possibilities. Records were reviewed, international leads were pursued, missing persons cases were examined. Yet, once again, nothing matched. The investigation had taken a wrong turn. What seemed like a breakthrough ultimately led nowhere. The victim remained unidentified. Years later, another promising lead emerged. A woman named Madeleine Cruz was considered a possible match after someone noticed similarities between her appearance and forensic reconstructions of Beth Doe. The possibility generated excitement among investigators and the media. After decades of uncertainty, many believed the mystery was finally about to be solved. Then the truth emerged. Madeleine Cruz was alive. Another lead had vanished. Another opportunity had disappeared, and Beth Doe remained without a name. For many cold cases, this is where the story ends. Evidence deteriorates. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Files gather dust. But investigators working the Beth Doe case refused to let that happen. They continued preserving evidence and searching for answers. Then a revolutionary new tool changed everything. Genetic genealogy. The same technology that helped identify suspects in other high-profile cold cases was now being used to identify unknown victims. In 2020, investigators partnered with forensic genealogy experts and specialized DNA laboratories. The goal was simple: extract enough genetic material from Beth Doe's remains to build a family tree. It was an ambitious undertaking. The remains had been exposed to the elements for decades. Traditional DNA testing methods had already reached their limits, but advances in forensic science made the impossible possible. Specialists successfully developed a detailed genetic profile. The profile was uploaded to genealogy databases used by ordinary people researching their ancestry. Then investigators waited. When the results arrived, everything changed. A significant DNA match pointed toward a man living in Texas named Luis Collin Jr. At first, he had no idea why law enforcement was contacting him. He wasn't a suspect. He wasn't involved in any crime. In fact, he had spent years searching for answers about a missing relative of his own. That relative was his aunt, Evelyn Collin. Luis had grown up hearing stories about the aunt nobody could find. He knew about the mysterious disappearance. He knew about the letter that convinced the family she had started a new life. And he knew how much pain the uncertainty had caused. When investigators contacted him, they began asking questions about his family history. The conversation quickly led to Evelyn. As additional DNA comparisons were completed, the truth became undeniable. Beth Doe and Evelyn Colin were the same person. After 44 years, the unidentified victim finally had her name back. The moment was emotional beyond words. For decades, the Colin family had searched for Evelyn, but they had been searching for a missing woman. They never realized she had been known to investigators under an entirely different identity. For the first time since 1976, they finally knew where she was. And with that discovery came another question. Who had killed her? Fortunately, identifying Evelyn gave investigators something they had never possessed before: a starting point. They immediately began reconstructing her final days. Every path seemed to lead back to one person: Luis Sierra, the father of Evelyn's unborn child, the last known person to have lived with her, the man who disappeared from the apartment at the same time she vanished. Family members told investigators about his controlling behavior. They described the relationship. They discussed the suspicious letter that arrived after Evelyn disappeared. And investigators made another troubling discovery. Evidence suggested that Evelyn likely had not written the letter herself. Attention increasingly focused on Sierra. By now, decades had passed. The young man from 1976 was an older adult living in New York. For years, he had lived an ordinary life. According to investigators, he never reported Evelyn missing. He never contacted her family looking for answers. He never appeared to search for either Evelyn or the child she was carrying. Those details raised serious questions. In March 2021, investigators traveled to New York to speak with him. When questioned, Sierra initially denied knowing Evelyn. But as the interview continued, his story changed. He eventually acknowledged that they had been in a relationship and that she had been pregnant with his child. Investigators pressed further. What happened to Evelyn? Why had he never looked for her? What about the letter sent to her family? The answers were not convincing. Following the interview, authorities believed they had enough evidence to move forward. An arrest warrant was issued. After more than 4 decades, Luis Sierra was taken into custody and charged in connection with Evelyn Colin's murder. The announcement stunned both investigators and the public. Not only had Beth Doe finally been identified, but authorities now believed they had found the person responsible for her death. For Evelyn's family, the moment brought a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief because they finally knew the truth. Heartbreak because the answers arrived decades too late. Their mother had spent years waiting by the window. Their father had searched for information. Entire generations of the family had grown up without knowing what happened. Now, after 44 years, the mystery was finally unraveling. But the legal battle was only beginning. The arrest of Luis Sierra marked a dramatic turning point in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly half a century. For investigators, identifying Evelyn Colin and locating the man they believed was responsible represented years of work finally paying off. For Evelyn's family, however, the emotions were far more complicated. The truth had finally arrived, but it arrived 44 years too late. The young girl they had loved was gone. Her unborn child was gone. And the people who should have received answers decades earlier had spent much of their lives living with uncertainty. As news of the arrest spread, family members spoke publicly about their reactions. Many described feeling overwhelmed. For years, Evelyn had existed in their memories as a missing loved one. Now, they were forced to confront the horrifying reality that she had been murdered long ago. The woman known to investigators as Bob Doe was finally Evelyn Colon. The teenager from Jersey City had her name back, and her family finally knew where she had been all those years. But while the identification brought closure to one mystery, it opened another chapter entirely. The case now moved into the courtroom. Prosecutors argued that the evidence pointed clearly toward Luis Sierra. According to investigators, he was the last known person to see Evelyn alive. He had lived with her during the final weeks of her pregnancy. He had disappeared at the same time she vanished. And perhaps, most importantly, authorities believed he was responsible for the letter that convinced the Colon family she had voluntarily left and started a new life. That letter became a major focus of the investigation. For decades, it had prevented anyone from realizing that Evelyn was missing. The family believed her. Police believed she had chosen to leave. The search that might have happened in 1976 never truly began. Investigators argued that the letter helped conceal the crime and delayed discovery of the truth for decades. The defense, however, challenged the case aggressively. Attorneys argued that there was no direct physical evidence connecting Sierra to the murder scene. No fingerprints, no DNA, no murder weapon. The crime had occurred more than 4 decades earlier, and many pieces of evidence that might have existed in the 1970s were no longer available. Witness memories had faded. Documents had been lost. Some evidence had been destroyed over time. The defense maintained that the prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and recollections from events that happened many years earlier. As legal proceedings continued, both sides prepared for what promised to be a difficult courtroom battle. One of the most significant disputes involved statements Sierra made during questioning. Defense attorneys argued that those statements should not be admitted as evidence. Prosecutors disagreed, insisting that the interview had been conducted properly and voluntarily. The issue became one of several legal challenges that would shape the future of the case. Meanwhile, Evelyn's family remained focused on something more important than legal arguments. They finally had answers. For decades, they had wondered whether Evelyn was alive somewhere, whether she had chosen to leave, whether she would someday walk through the front door again. Now they knew the truth. Painful as it was, uncertainty had finally been replaced by facts. The family also chose to honor the unborn child who never had the chance to live. For years, that child had existed only as an unnamed victim connected to a tragic crime. The family gave her a name, Emily Grace. It was a small act of remembrance, a way of acknowledging a life that had been lost before it even began. The story also highlighted the incredible power of modern forensic science. When investigators first discovered the remains in 1976, genetic genealogy didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. The technology that would eventually identify Evelyn was still decades away from being invented. Yet because investigators preserved evidence and refused to abandon the case, science eventually succeeded where traditional methods had failed. A single DNA match connected generations of family members. That match led investigators to Evelyn's identity. Her identity led investigators back to the people who knew her. And those people helped uncover a truth that had remained hidden for 44 years. It's a remarkable reminder that even the coldest cases can still speak. Evidence doesn't forget. Time may pass. Witnesses may disappear. Memories may fade. But sometimes the smallest clue survives long enough for justice to catch up. For Evelyn Colon's family, the journey was heartbreaking. A mother spent her final years waiting for a daughter who would never return. A father searched for answers that seemed forever out of reach. Siblings grew older, carrying questions nobody could answer, and an entire family lived beneath the shadow of uncertainty. Yet despite everything, they never completely gave up hope. And in the end, that hope mattered. Because after more than 4 decades, Evelyn's story was finally heard. Her identity was restored. Her memory was reclaimed. And the young woman once known only as Beth Doe was finally recognized for who she truly was. A daughter, a sister, a future mother, a victim whose name deserved to be remembered. Cases like this remind us why cold case investigations matter. Not because they can undo tragedy. Nothing can. But because every victim deserves their name. Every family deserves answers. And every truth, no matter how deeply buried, deserves a chance to be uncovered. Thank you for joining us on Revealer TV. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another investigation. Here on Revealer TV, we continue exploring the mysteries, crimes, and untold stories that history tried to forget. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep seeking the truth.